Welcome back to the channel, everyone. Tonight we bring you one of the most emotional and shocking stories in the history of 90 Day Fiancé. Julia Trubkina and Brandon Gibbs are names fans know well. They have gone through love, cultural clashes, and family struggles in front of millions of viewers. But behind the cameras, their real life was far more complicated than anyone imagined. For years, they tried to hold their marriage together, balancing love with loyalty and family with freedom. But eventually, the conflicts became too heavy. Arguments, ultimatums, and heartbreak forced them into a difficult decision. Julia and Brandon struggled with family disputes for a long time. In the end, they decided to sell all their properties, including their house, for $3 million. After the sale, they left the United States permanently and moved to Canada. At the same time, they announced that they would no longer participate in the 90 Day Fiancé show on TLC. One of the main reasons for the conflict was Brandon's mother. Allegations arose that Julia was treating her mother-in-law poorly. Upset by this, Brandon's mother told him, "Brandon, if you don't divorce Julia, then from today you are no longer my son. I will not accept you as my child anymore." Hearing these harsh words broke Brandon's heart. He realized that the only way to escape the turmoil was to leave everything behind. He sold all his property and moved to Canada with Julia to start a new life. When Julia first arrived in the United States, her story seemed like a fairy tale. A young woman from Russia, full of energy and dreams, had fallen in love with Brandon, a quiet farm boy from Dinwiddie, Virginia. Their romance began online, far from Brandon's family farm. Julia imagined America as a land of freedom and opportunity. But instead of city lights, she found early mornings, farm chores, and a mother-in-law who would soon control much of her life. Brandon's mother, Betty Gibbs, welcomed Julia with a smile. But that smile came with rules, expectations, and authority. From day one, Julia was told where to sleep, what to do, and how to behave. Even her and Brandon's intimacy was limited, with the couple forced to stay in separate rooms under Betty's roof. Fans remember the tension clearly, Julia's fiery personality clashing with her mother-in-law's strict rules. She was in love, but she felt trapped by the farm life, by Brandon's parents, and by her identity as Brandon's wife. At first, Brandon tried to manage it all. He worked long hours, obeyed his parents' rules, and promised Julia that things would get better. But the tension only grew. Julia's struggles weren't just about farm chores or isolation. She also felt she wasn't truly accepted. Rumors started circulating. Julia doesn't respect her mother-in-law. Julia is changing Brandon. She doesn't belong here. These whispers eventually turned into confrontations. Betty accused Julia of being rude and disrespectful, while Julia accused Betty of controlling their marriage and treating her like a guest instead of family. Brandon, caught in the middle, faced a painful test. On one side was his mother, who had raised him and guided him through life. On the other side was Julia, his wife and the person he loved. The cracks in their marriage widened. Arguments became common, and tension filled their home. Julia wondered if moving to America had been a mistake, while Brandon lay awake wondering how long he could keep both worlds together. Then the unthinkable happened. During a heated argument, Brandon's mother gave him an ultimatum. "Brandon, if you don't divorce Julia, you are no longer my son. I will not accept you as my child anymore." Those words hit hard. Julia turned pale, and Brandon's heart broke. He realized he could not have both his mother and his wife. For weeks, their home became tense. Conversations were cold, dinners were silent, and simple gestures of kindness disappeared. Julia withdrew into herself, imagining a life without constant conflict. Brandon walked the farm with a heavy heart, replaying his mother's ultimatum over and over. They barely spoke about the future, but both knew something had to change. One night, Julia finally spoke. "What if we just left?" she whispered. Brandon blinked in surprise. She explained, "Leave everything, the farm, the house, the fights. Start over somewhere far away, where no one tells us how to live." At first, Brandon thought it was impossible. The farm was his family's legacy. Selling it felt like betraying his parents. But he realized that no legacy mattered if it cost him his marriage. For Julia, the farm had never felt like home. Now she offered Brandon a way out. When they explored selling the property, they were shocked at its value. With the real estate market booming, offers came quickly. $3 million. It wasn't just money, it was freedom. Enough to leave the conflict behind and start fresh. The decision came with guilt. Selling the house and land meant cutting ties with Brandon's family history. But Brandon knew he had to act. During one final argument, Betty accused Julia of manipulating him. Julia, exhausted and angry, said, "I didn't come to America to be treated like a servant. I came to build a life with your son. But if this is what you want, to destroy us, then congratulations. We can't live like this anymore." Brandon realized Julia had reached her limit. He looked at her, then at his mother, and said calmly, "We're selling everything. The house, the land, all of it. Julia and I are leaving." The room went silent. His father dropped his fork. Betty's eyes widened in shock, but Brandon stood firm. His decision was final. Within weeks, the process began. Realtors walked the property, buyers toured the land, and contracts were drafted. Brandon and Julia watched strangers admire the fields that had once felt like a prison. When the deal closed, they held a check for $3 million in their hands. It was more than money. It was the key to freedom, the chance to start a life on their own terms. For the first time in years, Julia smiled without fear. She didn't just see numbers, she saw freedom. Brandon, holding her hand, felt both relief and heartbreak. Relief that he had chosen love. Heartbreak that he had turned his back on the family he once thought would never abandon him. But there was no going back now. The sale wasn't just a transaction. It was their escape plan. A chance for a new country, a new life, a place where they could finally breathe. The ink on the sale papers was barely dry when reality hit. They were no longer homeowners in Virginia. The farm, the fields, the house that carried decades of Gibbs family history, it was gone. For Julia, it felt like breaking free from chains that had bound her for years. She walked through the empty rooms with a strange sense of relief, each box packed bringing her closer to reclaiming her life. But for Brandon, every corner whispered memories. His childhood bedroom, the family kitchen, the barn he had worked in since boyhood, these weren't just walls and wood. They were pieces of his identity. And now they belonged to someone else. As the moving trucks pulled in, Julia stood firm. "We're not just moving houses," she told Brandon. "We're moving lives." They packed furniture, photos, and years of belongings. Julia kept only the essentials, her clothes, personal treasures, and a few keepsakes. Brandon lingered over every object, old photo albums, his father's tools, even the worn couch in the living room. Letting go was harder than he expected, but there was no time to hesitate. Their departure date was set. News of their decision spread quickly through the 90-day fiancé fan community. Rumors swirled. Why were they selling their home? Were they divorcing? Were they in financial trouble? To address the speculation, Julia and Brandon released a joint statement on social media. "After a lot of thought, we've decided to sell our home and move on to the next chapter of our lives. We are leaving the United States and starting fresh in Canada. This also means we are stepping away from 90-day fiancé. It's been an incredible journey, but it's time for us to live life on our own terms." The post exploded. Fans flooded their pages with messages of support and surprise. "We'll miss you on the show, but I hope you find peace in Canada. You are my favorite couple. Don't let anyone come between your marriage. Stay strong." But there were also critics. Some accused Julia of manipulating Brandon. Others sided with Betty, claiming Julia had torn the family apart. The online debate mirrored the conflict that had driven them away. Still, Julia didn't care. For the first time, she and Brandon were making a choice for themselves. Not for television, not for family expectations, but for love. As moving day drew closer, Brandon made one last attempt to reconcile with his parents. He invited them to the nearly empty house, hoping for a peaceful goodbye. His father arrived quietly, offering a stiff handshake, but Betty refused to soften. "You're making a mistake, Brandon," she said coldly. "This isn't Julia's win. This is your loss." Brandon's chest tightened. "Mom, I'm choosing my wife. I'm choosing my marriage. I thought you'd understand." Betty turned away, refusing to meet his eyes. Julia whispered beside him, "It's time to go." And just like that, the final thread connecting Brandon to his mother snapped. For Julia, the move wasn't just about boxes and luggage. It was about dreams. She packed her vision board, filled with magazine cutouts of city skylines, cafes, and travel adventures. She looked at Brandon and smiled. "In Canada, we start over. No farms, no ultimatums, just us." Brandon nodded, though deep inside, he wondered if starting over could truly erase the pain of leaving his family behind. The night before their departure, they stood in the driveway one last time. The stars above Virginia glimmered, the same stars that had watched over their first kisses, their arguments, and their vows. Brandon whispered, "Goodbye, home." Julia squeezed his hand. "Not goodbye, just moving forward." Their tickets were booked, their bags packed. With $3 million secured, they weren't just moving, they were reinventing themselves. The morning they left, Julia posted one final photo, her and Brandon standing with their suitcases, the old farmhouse in the background. The caption read, "Sometimes you have to let go of the past to build the future. Goodbye, America. Hello, Canada." And with that, they walked away, leaving the land, the house, the show, and the conflict that had nearly destroyed them. But as they boarded the plane, they could know that the challenges ahead in Canada would test them in ways even harsher than before. Leaving your country doesn't always mean leaving your problems behind. The plane touched down on a crisp morning in Vancouver. The skies were clear, mountains stood tall in the distance, and the air was a sharp contrast to Virginia's humid warmth. Julia pressed her forehead against the window and whispered, "This is it. Our fresh start." Brandon gave a tired nod. For him, this wasn't just a fresh start, it was a gamble. Canada was unfamiliar and uncertain. But seeing Julia's excited face, he knew he had to believe in the dream with her. The couple stepped into Canada with suitcases and hope. Julia was immediately captivated. The clean streets, multicultural faces, and the energy of city life she had long craved. "Do you feel it?" she asked Brandon. "It's like freedom in the air." Brandon managed a smile. "Yeah, it's different." Deep inside, though, the contrast hit him hard. No farmland, no barns, no familiar roads. This wasn't Virginia, and it didn't feel like home. With their financial cushion, Julia insisted they find a place that symbolized independence. After days of touring apartments, they settled on a modern condo overlooking the harbor. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed sweeping views of water and the city skyline. Julia laughed in the empty living room. "Can you believe this? This is ours. No parents, no farm, just us." Brandon dropped the suitcases on the couch. "It's beautiful," he admitted, though his voice lacked her excitement. Still, he signed the lease. For Julia, it was a dream come true. For Brandon, it was a leap into the unknown. Even in Canada, they couldn't escape the shadow of fame. News outlets and fan blogs called it the Great Escape. Some praised their courage, others mocked their decision. Julia embraced it, posting glamorous photos of their condo, the skyline, and their new adventures. One caption read, "Love is worth everything." They had left the past behind and stepped into a life they chose together, free from ultimatums, control, and conflict, ready to face whatever the future held. Julia and Brandon quickly realized that a fresh start didn't mean life would suddenly be easy. The first few weeks in Canada were full of excitement, but also adjustment. Everything felt different: the city streets, the pace of life, the people. Julia loved it immediately. The freedom, the variety of restaurants, the opportunities to explore new hobbies. Brandon, however, struggled more than he expected. He missed the familiar routines of the farm, the quiet of Virginia mornings, the deep connections he had with the land and the small-town community. Even the hustle and bustle of Vancouver's streets, which Julia found invigorating, felt overwhelming to him. They unpacked their suitcases, setting up the condo as their own. Julia turned a spare room into an office space where she could work remotely and plan future travels. Brandon focused on the kitchen, making it a comfortable place where he could cook and relax. The condo slowly started to feel like home, but there was always a lingering tension. Brandon wondered if they had made the right choice. Leaving behind family, a familiar life, and everything he had known was no small decision. Julia, sensing Brandon's unease, encouraged him to explore the city with her. They visited local markets, museums, and cafes. She introduced him to new foods, traditions, and experiences. Gradually, Brandon began to see the charm of city life. He loved the harbor view from their condo, the mountains in the distance, and the sense of independence he felt. For the first time in years, he could make choices solely for himself and his marriage, without feeling torn between his wife and his family. Even so, the shadow of their past followed them. Fans of 90 Day Fiancé continued to speculate about their move. Some online forums debated the morality of leaving behind Brandon's family, while others applauded their courage. Julia and Brandon decided early on to avoid getting drawn into online drama. They knew the opinions of strangers could not dictate their happiness. They focused instead on creating a life together, building routines, exploring their neighborhood, and enjoying moments of peace that had been impossible back in Virginia. Financially, the $3 million they had gained from selling their property gave them a significant cushion, but Julia was determined to be responsible. She carefully budgeted for their living expenses, travel, and future investments. Brandon, who had never managed money at this scale, relied on her guidance. At first, he felt anxious about spending, worried about wasting the hard-earned money from selling the farm. Julia reassured him, emphasizing that they now had the freedom to live life on their terms, but freedom also came with responsibility. They also began to build social connections in their new city. Julia, with her outgoing personality, quickly met neighbors, co-workers, and friends who shared her interests. Brandon was more reserved, but slowly he found people he could relate to, locals who appreciated his quiet demeanor, work ethic, and honesty. Having a support system beyond each other helped both of them feel more confident and secure in this new chapter of life. Work was another adjustment. Julia continued her online projects, but Brandon considered starting a small business. He missed working with his hands, so he explored opportunities in trades and crafts. Eventually, he decided to start a small landscaping and gardening service, something that connected him to nature but also fit within the urban Canadian environment. Julia supported him every step of the way, offering advice on marketing, finances, and customer relations. The business gave Brandon a sense of purpose, filling a gap that the farm once occupied in his heart. Their relationship strengthened during this time. Without the constant tension from Brandon's parents, they could finally focus on each other. Communication improved, and they began discussing long-term goals, travel, further investments, even the idea of starting a family. Julia encouraged Brandon to express his feelings openly, and he learned to rely on her support instead of internalizing his worries. The distance from family drama allowed them to heal together, rather than separately. But the transition wasn't without its challenges. Culture shock, bureaucracy, and minor misunderstandings in day-to-day life tested their patience. Applying for residency, opening Canadian bank accounts, understanding healthcare options, all of these tasks felt overwhelming at times. Yet they approached each challenge as a team. Each small victory, like successfully navigating a government office or completing a home improvement project, reinforced their belief that they had made the right decision. Over time, the excitement of the city became routine, and that routine brought comfort. Brandon started to enjoy jogging along the harbor, attending local farmers' markets, and experimenting with Canadian recipes. Julia explored local art galleries, joined a book club, and even took part-time photography classes. Both of them began sharing these experiences on social media, showing fans a glimpse of life after 90 Day Fiancé and the personal growth that had come from taking control of their destiny. The couple also began to reflect on their journey, understanding that their struggles had taught them invaluable lessons. Julia realized that compromise alone cannot save a relationship. Mutual respect, shared goals, and communication were essential. Brandon learned that love sometimes requires bravery and that loyalty to one's partner could outweigh societal or familial expectations. Both acknowledged that leaving their families behind had been painful, but necessary. It was a conscious choice to prioritize their marriage over everything else. As months passed, they started planning travel adventures across Canada. Julia dreamed of seeing the Rocky Mountains, the coastlines of Nova Scotia, and the multicultural cities that showcased Canada's diversity. Brandon, once hesitant, began to enjoy the idea of exploration. Each